Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Parker. This is the CS4HS Hangout on Air, and we are specifically going to be talking this afternoon about partnerships in professional development for high school computer science teachers. And I have a number of guests here today with me that are going to help me explore this topic of partnerships in the effort to develop good PD for computer science teachers. I want to give you a little bit of background as to why we're spending some time on this topic in particular, and then I will introduce our panelists and we will dig into the conversation in the details. As many of you hopefully have seen and know, the KEMSI study, the landscape study done on computer science professional development back in 2013, a number of the recommendations that came out of that study were really centered around having PD that was developed in conjunction with teachers or school districts, and having PD that was really school-focused and teacher-focused. So that data and that information from that study combined with a little bit of research that Google has done in the last year on the success of CS4HS programs since 2009, since we've started the program, really brought us to a point of recognizing that in order to fund good PD, one of the important elements of good PD is a good, strong, healthy partnership with the local school and or the local school districts. The data that we collected from previous CS4HS recipients indicated that those partnerships, either with a school or school district or even a local CSTA chapter, was really critical in the ongoing success of the professional development that was being done for the teachers in their local areas. So to that end, we thought it would be good to have a conversation about what do those partnerships look like, what are the keys to developing successful partnerships. And so I've brought together three folks here who have done successful CS4HS workshops and done successful PD and have built partnerships with the local teachers, the local school districts, the local schools in their areas. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into this topic of partnerships. Chris, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name is Chris Starr. I am currently a professor of information management at the College of Charleston. I've spent 28 years in computer science, about half that time chairing the department. And during my tenure in computer science, I spent some time motivating relationships with the local school districts and with high school teachers, at first to develop a pipeline of students into the computer science department at a liberal arts college in Charleston, South Carolina. So I'd like to tell you that story as we get through the questions, and we'll explore ways of developing these partnerships at any scale.
Great. And Patricia?
Yes, thank you. I'm Pat Moreale. I'm a professor of computer science also at Kane University, and like my colleagues here, spent several decades working in computer science and establishing the pipeline. Here at Kane University, we're in New Jersey, outside New York City, kind of an urban environment, and over the last almost 10 years, we've built a substantial pipeline with the assistance of Google, and I'm hoping to share that with you this evening.
And Dave.
Hi, I'm David Jenzen. I am also a professor of computer science at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California, and a couple of things that are maybe unique about my situation is we're a public university, about 19,000 students, but we're in a fairly rural area. The city of San Luis Obispo is only about 45,000 people, and a number of smaller towns in the area, and we have several public school districts in the area in order to partner with and work with. And so I'll tell some of the story of that and relationships that we've built there.
Great, fantastic, thank you. Well, let's start by talking a little bit about just sort of generally why, and from your experiences, why these partnerships have been so important and so critical to your success in doing PD.
Well, I would say here at Kane, one of the big factors was there wasn't any community at all for computer science teachers, and with the advantage of Google CS4HS funding, we were able to reach out to teachers, often a single individual at her or his school, and begin to pull them together into a community, gathering them every summer here over several years, and creating that sense of unity, and then reinforcing through the academic year with the Computer Science Teachers Association chapter meetings that we began hosting.
Great. And Pat, can you tell us a little bit about how, just sort of tactically, how did you go about creating that sort of unity and sense of community through your partnership?
Well, it was a bit of a challenge because our teachers are so busy in the public schools. But we were able to identify one or two in each district and work with them, and usually they knew a few others and a few others, and gradually we were able to build up a network of, 10 becomes 20, becomes 30, and so on. Finally, to really extend our reach, I started to gather the names of superintendents and principals and their email addresses. Often this is publicly available on the web, and I was able to work with one of my students who was able to gather it. And we started to build a mailing list, both of teachers in the classroom and also of supervisors, superintendents, and curriculum supervisors, as they call them here in New Jersey, who oversaw the mathematics and computer science, and we reached out to those people also.
Great. And Dave, I know your experience down in Cal Poly is a little bit different. Can you talk about how you got your partnership started in that area?
Yeah. And what is interesting for me is that our partnership really grew naturally, or organically, maybe we would say these days, through personal relationships. I have 4 children, 1 in college now, 3 still in high school, but starting out when they were in elementary school, just by my personally volunteering in the classroom and offering to do at the time Alice workshops after school, the elementary schools were excited about that, and word quickly spread, and that started building relationships. Principals started paying attention and asking what's going on, and then as that grew, and I kind of got some of my other professor colleagues here at the university who also have children, they started doing similar things as well in where their kids were going to school. And so we naturally started getting to know these people. Then when we received a CS4HS grant the first time in 2011, I did like Pat said, and I went and started scouring websites and finding email addresses for who is it I don't know, and who are the superintendents and the principals at schools and possibly computer science teachers in other school districts that we haven't yet met. And that's how we kind of built our community.
That's great. At Google, we call that being scrappy. You just take what you have and you make it work, and you get done what you need to get done. That's great. I'm sorry, Chris, tell us a little bit about your experience in South Carolina.
Well, it's interesting. In Charleston, we're a bit scrappy too. And like Dave, with 4 children in the public school system, I had managed to develop relationships long before a CS4HS application, but I was able to leverage those relationships both in a public school setting and a private school setting, where interestingly, in both cases, there was top-down support from the headmaster or principal, along with the teacher interest. Then when we worked on our CS4HS application, we identified an NSF grant to teach Alice to teachers, and so the CS4HS funding helped us to multiply the impact of that earlier grant, and we were able to expand the impact of our CS4HS across the entire state of South Carolina when we brought teachers in.
Great, fantastic. Well, as you can see here, we have 3 folks that have a wealth of experience from very different parts of the country with very different audiences. So this is a great opportunity for you to ask questions. There is the Q&A section in the Hangout, and we encourage you to pop in some questions there at any time. We want to have you be a part of this conversation and answer the questions that you have. So please feel free to let us know what you're thinking about. So tell me a little bit more, Chris, about what sort of tactically the partnerships, how they evolved over time. You said that you started locally and that you've ended up, scaling across the state. Can you
Right.
go into a little bit more detail on how that happened?
Here's how it happened. After I recognized that I had some connections, I was talking to colleagues, as you do in a department, and rubbing elbows, discover that there are complementary assets and interests. So in the public school setting, one of my colleagues, the one with the NSF grant, had worked with a person in computer science at the state level. And so that introduction helped to bring about a conversation which opened up mailing lists for all the CS teachers in South Carolina. We ended up creating a statewide CS4HS group. In the private side, the innovations in computer science at the College of Charleston were put into the local newspaper, and then the private school saw that and invited us in to do a curriculum remodel. And so, again, a top-down development happened at the school, and that resulted in additional connections outside of the public school community to another rich audience.
Great. And is there a difference in the partnership between the public and the private schools, or would you say that those partnerships are similar?
The partnerships are similar, but they are managed differently. In a public school setting, you have to manage them more in a hierarchy, but in private school, if you can go straight to the teacher or the headmaster, it's an easier job in some regards.
Okay, great. And I think, Pat, if I remember correctly, you have experience both at the high school level and maybe the elementary, middle school level managing some partnerships.
Right. We had first gone in, obviously our students at the university had come from a variety of high schools in the region, being a public regional university, and I knew which high school teachers might be the most approachable because I had their students sitting in my computer science and information technology classes. So we often reached out to those teachers initially, and those teachers themselves, the ones in the high school teaching CS, are often the ones that the middle school teachers then talk to about what should they be doing in the middle school to encourage students and so forth. So we added the middle school teachers to our mailing list, and as was mentioned, the private schools, often there will be one teacher teaching, maybe a full 12 through 6 range of grades, while the public school might have the luxury of having someone who only taught 11th and 12th graders. So when we would go into the private school communities, and sometimes these were girls' schools, which was also very helpful to us, we would be able to reach a greater spectrum of student talents and ages.
Great. Well, it looks like Audrey has a question. What impact has your CS4HS program made? Since we're talking about partnerships, I'm going to assume that that question is maybe hopefully specifically around the partnership. So have your partnerships with these schools and school districts made an impact at that, maybe the administration level, an impact that's beyond just the teacher gaining knowledge of CS?
Yes, I would really say so. One thing many of our teachers would learn, they would hear that a teacher had gone before the school board in their district to demonstrate student projects, and as a result, more courses were added in the curriculum because the school board and the public attending the meeting were very happy. So one teacher hearing about another teacher's success really led to more public communication and more ways of attracting attention and support from the administration. The general idea was, anything positive with students in the computing area you can get attention for can be really beneficial to your students and your classes at the high school.
That's great. Fantastic.
Yeah, I would jump in if that's okay.
Yeah.
And say that it's been a slow progress in our area. I remember back in 2011 at our first CS4HS workshop, I gave a keynote and I talked about a number of things, what's changing in the computing industry and the demand and the jobs, but also about this new AP CS Principles course that's coming and encouraging the high schools to consider that. And it's not happened. Finally now it's starting to happen. But along the way, as my kids and some of the other kids were growing up and going to middle school, we started to get to know people in the middle school and teaching them Scratch. And so one of the big things we saw was a middle school that became the pilot in our primary school district here for a STEAM program. And so adding art to STEM. and making Scratch one of the central, and computing one of the central components of that. And because of CS4HS, they invited me and another faculty to come in and do some training on Scratch for all their faculty. We had the music faculty and the PE faculty, and they're learning Scratch and figuring out how could they apply this, and that was very exciting to see. And now that's starting, we're just now seeing that coming with the high schools, starting to, for next year, roll out AP CS principles as well.
That's great. That's exciting.
I'll finish by saying from South Carolina that we saw the public school, one of the largest public schools in South Carolina where we had our relationships, Wando High School, double the number of AP computer science sections and have to cut off enrollment at 60.
Wow.
One of the secondary impacts was seeing that the principal became supportive once she had the input from the parents who echoed the success of these students and that interest that was generated in AP computer science because of our work through Google. And at the private school level, we were able to completely rewrite a 4-year computer science curriculum. And so that's been a new asset that we never envisioned when we started our CS4HS project, but it's led to these secondary effects that I think have tremendous impact.
Yeah, that's great. Great. So I would love to talk a little bit about how your partnerships have maybe influenced the PD that you've done. You know, Chris, you talk about this curriculum now that you're working on or you've worked on. Has these partnerships with these districts and the teachers better informed how you're thinking about PD or professional development?
It is, in that before CS4HS, there was a barrier between the university and the high school secondary system, and I think this barrier has been reduced and in some cases eliminated, so that we see how we can approach the planning and execution of PD and participate in additional PDs beyond the scope of our original proposal and keep them going with different funding. And so it really taught us a lesson in how to engage in the university to become a community partner.
Great. Do you have any anecdotes to share of lessons learned, things that you're doing differently now that you...
Well, I do. I have one that I'd like to share, and then, of course, our colleagues here can chime in. One is that the university found that it could, through these relationships, get permission to deliver a university course in the high schools. And so in every high school we have a partnership with, we deliver computer science courses, or have in the past, and we're invited to do so with the principals and headmasters, and we deliver a dual credit in courses that would exceed an AP computer science course.
Okay. Great. Any, Dave or Pat, anything you want to add to that idea of ways in which your partnership is influencing the delivery or the content of your PD, and maybe things that you're doing now that you weren't doing in the beginning, or things you did in the beginning that you're not doing now because of lessons learned?
Well, I think that I would certainly agree that barriers have been removed. There's a lot more back and forth. I would liken it to almost a swinging door between the high schools and the universities that did not exist before for us. Today, I had a young man, senior in high school, who's taking his high school's very good, but well, it's pretty good. But doesn't have the resources and the number of students that might want to take a computer science course. So if it hadn't been for the activities of the last couple of years, this student would not have the opportunity to take computer science as a high school student, because the school cannot offer an AP course and they do not have a teacher for it, let alone a room. So he's now in his second semester here at Kane University taking a Java course. And he has a bunch of other buddies that come over with him from the high school. It's ingrained now in the public school system that they will send a few students over to the university. And this is not just limited to computer science now. It's broadened out to some of the other science and mathematics, which is an enormous plus. And frankly, just the exchange of ideas back and forth, as well as students and faculty, as we've heard tonight, has been an enormous initiative.
Great.
I would just add a little bit and say that in our high school, because there are very few, I'm getting a little echo. There we go. Because there are very few CS teachers in the high schools, and most of them can't even teach computer science full-time, they are in need of kind of canned and easy preparations, things that we can give them that they can't spend a lot of time on this because it's one of several preparations they have, and even more so, the more that we can come into the classroom and help them. And so that's one of the things we're preparing for next year with starting these APCS principles, is ways that we as university faculty and our students, undergraduate and graduate students, can actually go out to the high schools in order to help equip them a little better, especially the first time through a new course. So that's something that's different. At the beginning, we thought that we would just present these great things and they'd go off and do them themselves, but I think we need to help them even more.
Yeah. Yeah, and that underscores another change that we made in the CS4HS funding program last year, was the introduction of this idea of a community of practice, that we really want we want to fund programs that are spending time doing instruction around CS, but we also want there to be a strong component around this idea of a community of practice where the PD practitioners like yourselves are setting up systems and support structures for the teachers in the classrooms so that they are able to connect with their peers, connect with teachers that have a little bit more experience, or graduate students with a little bit more experience that can come in and help them, coach them through that process of really understanding this material and making changes in the classroom. The research is pretty clear that the best way to implement change in the classroom, to support the teachers with change in the classroom, is through this idea of a community of teachers working together, working through the problems and the challenges, and growing. So that's great to hear. I can't wait to see more of the impact of your work down there, Dave. So tell me a little bit. Well, let me remind our viewers that if you have questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We would love to answer any questions that you have, whether it's about partnerships or even just the CS4HS application process in general. So let's talk a little bit about, to those folks that maybe have never done PD before, or they're just getting their toes wet. Maybe they've never applied for a CS4HS award before. What would you say are the necessary sort of skill sets that are factors for success that someone needs to be thinking about as they're starting down this road of doing PD?
Interesting question. I'll start with saying, find out what motivates the high school teacher, and don't think that what motivates me is the same thing. So I went to my school of education or college of education, and I started asking what is important to a high school teacher and how would I engage them. And so that was eye-opening to know that I needed to solve some of their problems while I worked on mine.
And did your school of education, did someone from the school of education work with you pretty closely as you developed?
Right. They did as a silent partner mentor, but not directly in the program, and that was useful to have somebody I could fall on with questions and some immediate tactical issues. Right.
Because you spend all of your time thinking about CS, but they spend all of their time thinking about teaching teachers how to teach, huh?
Right.
Yeah. Pat, you're laughing a little bit. Do you have a... Oh, hold on just a second. You're muted. Let's get you unmuted. Okay, should we try? There we go.
Okay. Yes, I was smiling. I was not laughing. But it is true. The College of Education is a very good starting point, and I think we would all agree that often in our areas, in your community, you will find that many of your teachers were trained at a single institution or a couple of institutions, and tapping into that's a really good resource. The challenge with computer science, as we all know, is that the pedagogy is evolving. Certainly at the university level, we have this apprentice model where we will show the students and then they will follow us and so forth. The best practitioners at any level of any teaching environment are certainly motivating and training and so forth. So finding the really sparky, talented high school teachers is just a wonderful thing, and sharing them. So one of the things I did in trying to put together our program is certainly went out and tried to ask the teachers what did they need. One of my more senior colleagues who had done this in years past said, Pat, what they need is they need something to take home. And he meant, you know, lesson plans, curriculums, and so forth. And as was previously mentioned, making sure your teachers leave your professional development with materials they can explicitly use in the classroom. Resources that can just roll out seamlessly that they got feedback on, or repositories and things like that. The other thing I found that they wanted were the occasional outside expert who could speak very straightforwardly and communicate very strongly with them, whether it's about best practices in teaching or the use of technology or things like that. They enjoyed the occasional guest speaker, not too much of that. And finally, any specific information about careers, ways to prepare their students for college, ways to make sure their students would be successful professionally, numbers, data about hiring in your region, things that you might know as a faculty member or professional very easily. Maybe the high school professional doesn't know that information. If you can share that with them in a way they can take it back and share it with their administrators and parents, as has been mentioned, that's very powerful.
Great.
Yeah, and I would add to that two things. One, I agree with coming in and sharing that kind of information that we, as university professors, know about jobs, and we're kind of the next step for the high school teachers and the high school students, and knowing what kind of internship opportunities there are for those students when they hit high school and what the job market looks like. That's good and valuable, and having motivating examples for them of the kinds of things you can do. Part of my work is I work with a lot of students in startups doing entrepreneurial work, and I have a startup of my own. We have an app, a little plug here, called Squid. It's a handwriting note-taking app that's used in a lot of classrooms, and they love seeing those examples, for me to be able to come in and for them to say, oh, you're a co-founder of a startup and this can really happen. And high school students are interested in, you know, business ideas, and high school teachers want to help them do those kinds of things. And so those motivating examples are really powerful. But then the second thing I wanted to say is, as university faculty, to try and learn a little bit about that high school world, and especially maybe public schools, you know, learning about Common Core and issues they're dealing with there, and going to places like SIGSI, where you know what are the kind of national initiatives that are going on. A lot of these teachers don't have opportunity to go to those conferences, and you can kind of be the conduit for them and relay information that you're hearing from others as what's happening nationally, and communicate that to them, things that they care about.
Yeah, that's great. So here's another question, maybe to flip the coin a little bit, because we have seen in recent funding cycles more folks from educational nonprofits and some CSTA chapters applying for CS4HS awards. Talk to the individual that's not a CS professor that maybe wants to try and establish a partnership with a CS professor in their local area. What recommendations would you give that person that wants to approach someone like you or pursue a CS professor for a partnership to do some PD?
Well, we were actually approached by a group of parents that wanted more computer science in their community, and we helped them through professional development materials, sharing information about hiring, demographics, and also showing them where there were curriculums that had been prepared and vetted by teachers and so forth, help them make a case then to their community about the need for computer science. It first started as a bit of an after-school program, and then I believe they've been able to add another teaching position in the high school. And again, this was parent motivated, so it wasn't as organized as perhaps, well, I mean, it was probably an educational not-for-profit foundation. But it was just a volunteer situation.
I think that for the public school or the schools districts to recognize faculty are incredibly busy. We have a lot of things going on, and we have a lot of choices on where we spend our time. And so when they come to have some specific things in mind of what they're looking for is really useful, but especially when it can be tied to something that we as faculty can get credit for. So rather than just doing some, volunteering, but to actually be on a committee where I can put that down as this is official service, that faculty can kind of get credit for those kinds of things. To, for instance, get a grant like CS4HS that they want to support and be a part of, and that the schools are willing to write a letter of support for that, or just put, you can put my name down that we're interested and we support you in that. Those are things that we as faculty can kind of get credit for getting this grant, and that helps us justify our time and be more motivated in working with the schools.
Great, that's great.
That's a good point, David. And Pat, I loved your anecdote too. The other experience that we had in Charleston was being approached by teachers and parents who supported girls in science and technology. And so they picked up the ball and made contact, and were able to find professors who were willing to go in and speak and motivate those middle school students to enter the CS programs once they went to high school. And so that helped to make the chain longer, the supply chain of students. And one ramification has been that not only do we need to have a better PD infrastructure post summer programming, we also needed to build a way to answer questions that come directly from the high school students now that we have a better university relationship. So there's a great deal of requests that come in over email and phone that need to be answered, and whether it's from a parent or a student, we've got to respond just like it's from one of our high school teacher partners.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So how would you, maybe a two-part question, you can decide which version of the question you want to answer. Have you had partnerships that haven't worked out so well, and what were the indications or the red flags that it wasn't working, and how did you deal with it? And the flip side of that question is, what does a good, healthy partnership and relationship, what are sort of the hallmarks of that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We've had partnerships that, I wouldn't say we had partnerships that didn't work out well, but they kind of didn't go anywhere. It's not that anything bad happened, but in particular, we are located near the ocean and in a very nice community that people like to come to. And so when we did our first CS4HS workshop, we had people that found out about it and they wanted to come because we're a great vacation spot. And that was great. We welcomed them and they came, but they didn't continue on as a part of a relationship there. And that's okay. We were happy to give them what we could offer at that time, but it didn't materialize into other things. It was the local people, really, that within a 50-mile radius or so that we were really able to keep up that connection with.
Yeah. Right.
I think that 50-mile radius is a really important thing to keep in mind. With your PD, you will find that you may draw a crowd at the moment, but the core, the community is that you'll sustain with throughout the year, there will be some natural drop-off for people who are not able to participate as fully. I think a good, healthy partnership comes from, as has been said earlier, the interpersonal, the kind of regular follow-up, the forwarding of an article that you thought was good, or sharing a video or something, just the small, regular interactions rather than coming through once a year by saying, oh, I'm writing a grant, I need a letter of support or something like that, which we're all occasionally guilty of. But just the regular nurturing activities where you're mutually tending to each other's interests throughout the calendar year.
I'll extend that notion one more further and say that a successful CS4HS program is going to put sustained scalability demands on you and your department. And in order to do it right, you got to be prepared for the success that you may have.
Yep, that's great. That's great. Fantastic. Well, I will ask again if there are any more questions that folks have. And I'll share just a little bit, a few sort of tactical details about the CS4HS funding cycle. Applications can be found at cs4hs.com/application. There's also a page on that website that goes over the eligibility. Anyone from a university or college or a nonprofit educational institution is welcome to apply. We are accepting applications through midnight, March 14th, which is early Monday morning on the 14th. We will be, Google and myself included, will be at the SIGC conference coming up in Memphis, Tennessee in the beginning of March 2nd through the 5th. And I would be happy to talk with any of you about your applications, any questions that you have, anything that you want to share with me, please seek me out. There's a number of Google sessions, and we'll be having a Google booth there. So please look for us. We have another question. Can you elaborate on the success that you may have in terms of scalability? That's a great question, Audrey. Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, there are two ways to scale up. I'll take a stab first, and there are two ways. Well, there's several ways to scale up. Some of the easiest way is, as I say, just kind of organically growing it, inviting members from one year to include and think of other people that would want to be participating the following year and so forth. So scaling up in terms of the community that you're pulling together during the summer, and then also continuing on through the fall and spring semesters of the academic year. That's one way. The second way is thinking about scaling the resources in terms of the number of students that you're reaching in the high school and middle school. Building a repository or a web page pointing to repositories that other people maintain nationally. There are quite a few of them. And again, cultivating a mailing list, as has been mentioned earlier, and making sure that you're communicating the resources on the web page, pushing it out to this community, and thereby scaling it through your communication.
Great. Any follow-up to that? Oh, Chris, you're muted.
So sorry. There we go. So sorry. We were able to scale by asking the admissions office for a list of high schools sorted in the order that they provide a large bandwidth of students to our university. And that's provided a platform where we can engage more people at the schools that have the strongest potential for connectivity. So that was one way to scale up the numbers. And the second thing we had to do is to figure out how to give ownership to people beyond the core who first delivered the CS4HS program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking when you were speaking, Chris, that all three of you have used the term we. I'm assuming that there are more people behind your efforts than just yourselves.
I think it's important, and it's difficult perhaps from the perspective of a faculty member to let go of what seems to be their territory or grant. So getting past the academic politics is kind of one of the first hurdles for long-term scalability and viability. So the program is owned by a department or college or university. It's not owned by an individual faculty member.
So do you have other faculty or graduate students or teachers themselves that are actually involved in scaling and maintaining the program?
I started with a faculty colleague, and from that point we added undergraduate students. That's our primary resource here. And then beyond that, we had some key faculty in high schools around South Carolina who were supportive and quite vocal within the email group that was established, and that helped us to maintain a visibility beyond the scope of the program. Great.
Anything you want to add, Dave or Pat, about the people behind you?
Yeah, I'll add that I did instigate it just by saying, hey, there's this thing called CS4HS, we ought to do it, and I immediately had some great responses. What's interesting is, you know, there were maybe 4 or 5 other faculty in the department who said, I want to be a part of that, and all of them had kids in the school districts, and that was just a common thread, that they were motivated to make this happen in the schools, and they've continued because their kids, you know, are growing up, and it is interesting how we've kind of moved more towards high school, because a lot of our kids have gotten older, and we started out doing more things in the elementary school, and we need to be conscious of that and actively refocus on, don't forget the middle school, don't forget the elementary school, what are some things we can do with them. But that's definitely where we find the most interest, is faculty who have children of their own.
I agree. Certainly there is a team behind the effort. What I found was, over the years, if I tried to have maybe a theme and then bring in maybe some faculty that could contribute to it, and yes, often they had small people at home or were very engaged in making sure there was educational outreach in their community. One year we did a computational science theme because STEM was all the rage in our state, and it still is, but it was particularly principals were asking their faculty, what are you doing on STEM? How can we have this in the STEM curriculum? And then the next year we began to focus more on pure computer science and the opportunities in our community that were for computer science graduates, because the enrollments were starting to pick up and teachers were asking us, are our students prepared enough for your curriculum? And so we talked about what it meant to be a first or second year computer science student at the university, and that allowed us to talk about how computer science could be put into mathematics courses if the school was not yet fortunate enough to have computer science, and how this could often evolve then to its own standalone course. So there is definitely a team behind anyone doing PD for CS4HS, because I personally think you can't do the whole curriculum yourself. You need a cast, not of thousands, but of a few really good, trusty souls that can speak on different topics that the teachers would be very interested in hearing about. And this expands your reach and also increases the points of contact between your organization and the teachers and the community you're working with.
Yeah, great, fantastic. So Audrey asked another question about MOOCs. I don't think any of you guys doing anything online, or is it all face-to-face for the 3 of you, huh?
Well, I did create a Java Essentials for Android course that's on Udemy, and so it's not exactly a MOOC in that sense, but by offering that to high schools, I've had a lot of high schools. I say, here's free coupons for anybody who's a high school teacher or high school students, and I've had a lot of high schools that have come and said, yeah, I'd like to do that as sometimes supplement to like their AP computer science class, or kind of an addition for students that are wanting to go on and maybe do some Android development, and so that's been a really rewarding thing to be able to give that out. But I think there's a lot more that could be done with MOOCs, depending on the environment, especially for those students that want to go on, want to go further. I know, unlike Pat, who mentioned that they have high school students that are coming into the university, we don't have that luxury. We're so impacted in our major. It's incredibly competitive to get into computer science that we don't allow local high school students to take classes here, which is really unfortunate. And so those advanced students that want to go on, they don't have alternatives. And so letting the high school teachers know about some of these MOOCs and courses that they could do kind of directed study, independent study with those students, I think is good.
Yeah. And I will mention that CS4HS has funded some MOOCs in the past. Irene Lee has worked on the Project Guts program that now has an online version. Jeff Gray out of the University of Alabama has done a MOOC around the new AP Computer Science Principles curriculum framework, and then Jen Rosato and Ralph Morelli have also done a MOOC around using App Inventor with the new AP Computer Science Principles material. So all of those MOOCs are available, and in this past funding year in 2015, we saw a number of interesting proposals that we funded where folks leveraged that online material that Jeff put together, that Jen put together, and had their teachers go through those MOOCs, and then they ran the local communities of practice. So folks didn't have to actually sort of create or reinvent the actual curriculum or content being covered. They allowed other people to do that, and they focused on the community of practice. This year we are looking again for content that's going to be touching on and covering one or several or all of the 7 big ideas from the new AP Computer Science Principles framework. So the possibility of using and leveraging those MOOCs is again a possibility, and we would welcome proposals around that.
I think that's an important point. One of the functions, I think, of professional development at a university such as the one we have represented here is that we act almost as a clearinghouse. We can talk about the various differences between these offerings and how they might meet different student needs, and the teachers can talk about the learning outcomes, the objectives, the assessments that they have to do, because that's an important part of the high school teachers I'm working with. They're very interested in all the curriculum offerings that are available. They don't know which ones are necessarily going to be the best for their students or help them get the outcomes that they're supposed to have according to state standardized norms and so forth. So just a good discussion of what works and what doesn't, and how you might have to supplement or which topics might be too sophisticated for your students among teachers can be very useful in cutting a path through the MOOC forest, if you will.
Yeah, you know, that's a great comment, Pat, that really, I think, hits at the heart of what we believe is important about the CS4HS program, is that we want to put funding into the local communities. You guys are the experts. You know your teachers, you know your communities, and you know what's needed. And so we trust that you're going to do your research and your understanding of that local teacher community through these partnerships, and build a PD program that's going to work best for your local communities, your teachers, your schools, and your districts. And so it's going to look different, as you've seen here through these conversations, and as I talked about some of these MOOCs, the PD can potentially look different from one area of the country to another, because the CS spectrum is so broad, and the teachers are on a very wide spectrum in terms of their development and what they need. So we just ask, when you fill out your application, that you make a strong argument for, if you believe that a certain approach needs to be taken with your PD, you just need to make a strong argument for that. Why is this approach the right approach for your teachers?
Karen, can you maybe answer about the timeline of, once you've applied, kind of what comes next? When can you propose to start doing something? You know, could you propose a PD workshop in May? Would a decision be out by then, or things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We work very hard to get our funding decisions made by the first week of April. So applications are due March 14th, midnight, March 14th. Our commitment is to tell you yes or no you have received funding by the first week of April, and then we work hard to get the money actually distributed to the recipients within a month, 5 weeks, so like the beginning of May, maybe the middle of May. Part of that depends upon whether you've gotten funding from us in the past, you have to give us a bunch of information about where to send the money, all that financial accounting stuff. So the faster we get that information from you, the faster we can get the money to you, if that makes sense. So depending upon how much planning you've done and whether you actually need to have the money in your pocket to actually execute on the PD, you could maybe in theory be doing something in May. I know a lot of CS4HS awardees have done things in June. I don't know if I've seen anyone do anything as early as May though.
Okay.
Well, scheduling's everything. I mean, that's the other thing that it took us a number of years to kind of figure out. Here on the East Coast, our schools go through roughly the end of June, and so our teachers get maybe July and August to themselves. We had to schedule ourselves around the CSTA National Conference and family holidays and away for the 4th of July and things like that. So new folks should talk to a teacher or two and see when a good time might actually be to schedule the PD. Maybe it's a Sunday or Saturday situation, maybe it's afternoons, or maybe there is a period of time during the summer break.
Yeah, another benefit of those partnerships is really figuring out what's going to work best for the teachers in your audience.
Right.
Oh, we have some questions, some budgeting questions. Can you speak a bit about your budget? Are you paying teachers, students to participate? I'll jump in here. We have posted in our Google Plus community all of the questions on our application have been put into a PDF and are posted in our Google Plus community. So if you want to see exactly what budget questions we're asking, I encourage you to go take a look at that PDF. And now I'll let you guys talk a little bit about your budgets.
Okay, I'll jump in and in turn saying when we received our CS4HS funding, we took it in under the advancement office as opposed to the grants office, and that makes a difference in how long it takes to get the money into a cycle where you can spend it. So think about where it's going to land when it gets to your campus. And in terms of budget, we learned that teachers have opportunities for doing professional development in different locations during the same summer. And so you have to incentivize them to participate. And in our case in Charleston, it was like David's case apparently, where people just want to come to Charleston, bring the kids and do the PD. So we didn't have to incentivize much. And we also learned that the stronger that our professional relationship was with participants, the less we had to give them on the front end to get them to participate.
Yeah, I would say that giving stipends to the participants the first time was really important in motivating some people to come. We really wanted to get as many people as possible, and they told us that, yeah, that convinced me to take a day or two, whatever it was, out of my summer and come spend it with you because I got a little money. And we even that first year offered continuing education units. And as a part of the workshop, it was such an administrative nightmare. I don't know that I would do it again, but the teachers really appreciated that. Some of them, I just needed another whatever quarter unit, and this got it for them. And so that was good getting people to come. But the funding is important, is valuable.
Funding is very important. Stipends do make a difference. I agree. Teachers have a lot of opportunities on how to spend their time. We have offered CEUs. It is a little simpler, I think, for us, perhaps, for whatever reason, so that is important. But the teachers do calculate, travel time, gas, tolls, things like that. I found, I've been surprised by the amount of, stipends for the teachers, fair amount of money for the food. The teachers, you do want to pay attention to feeding them. It helps make for a pleasant environment, and they enjoy that, and they're very appreciative. We've included, I believe, a breakfast and a lunch, which really helps the crowd go well. I was able to get donated swag. Usually I could get people, whether it's Google's generosity or NC WIT, the National Center for Women in Information Technology, they're very generous with their items and stickers and things like that. Publishers will also donate books. At one point I was teaching Android development to the teachers, and Sam's was very generous. I said I would give the book to each teacher who would then be teaching students, which was absolutely absolutely true, and in some cases the book has probably been adopted. So that's another avenue that you might want to think about. So again, sending teachers home with a small stipend, CEUs, some swag, and some lesson plans, I mean, that's a home run hit.
Can we add, beyond paying teachers or incentivizing teachers, we also paid a cadre of students. So during the PD during the summer, we had about a 2-to-1 ratio, so that every high school teacher had an immediate person at their shoulder to answer questions and make sure they were successful. And I think that piece of budget went a long way to making a successful program.
And I would point out, if you have a college of education or if you have teachers in training, that would be another plus, I think, for anything that you're doing, either at your own school or in the terms of the grant reviewers. Sharing those teachers in training with actual practicing teachers in the high school who could later potentially be contacts for teaching positions or student teaching is very, very powerful.
We have a question here from Sam. Do you have an estimate for the number of grantees in the U.S. or success rate? You can go on to the CS4HS website to see the awards that we have funded in the past, in previous years. Unfortunately, it's hard to give a success rate because our budget allocation changes every year, and the requirements for eligibility and what we're seeking to fund every year changes, so it's hard to anticipate what we're going to fund this year based on what we've done in the past. So I'm sorry, Sam, I can't give you a more concrete answer there. Any other questions? We have a few minutes left, so if any other folks have questions, pop them into the Q&A now. Or if you have any parting thoughts, Pat and Dave and Chris.
Well, one thought in conclusion is this. The advice would be pick up the tools and apply. There's no way that you're going to lose. If you can get through an application process and win, you're going to be fantastic, and if not, there will be other sources of funding in your community that you can go to execute what you've done to plan the PD.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. I've heard people say that our application process compared to other funding sources is actually a breeze. So if you're going to take a stab in the dark, maybe this is the program to take a stab in the dark with.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I would just add one thing we haven't talked about much is in your PD, making it hands-on is great. Our teachers tend to love it when we go into the lab and actually they learn something about Racket or processing or Scratch or whatever it is, App Inventor, and they get to try something new. And so we even had administrators, principals and superintendents in there getting their hands on, seeing what it's like to do these things and making it accessible to them. It generates some excitement, and I think that's great to include. Don't just talk at them, let them do things.
That's a very good point. You might want to think about mornings where you share ideas and then afternoons where you do them, if you will. So good point.
Yep. Agreed.
Right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you. I've learned a number of things myself, so I very much appreciate your time, Pat and Dave and Chris, and thanks for all those that have tuned in. We look forward to seeing your applications. Again, cs4hs.com. Join our Google Plus community. We will be doing a few more Hangouts before the applications close on March 14th. We'll be at SIGSI if you're there. Come find us, ask us questions. You can also submit questions about the application process on our Google Plus community or send an email to cs4hs@google.com. Thanks so much and have a great evening.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You.